this year's festival, there are a number of films which really ask us as audience members to engage people on a very personal level. They open themselves up to us in ways that make them vulnerable to us as members of the audience. And what I was interested in, and when Nate and I were talking about panel ideas, I was interested in how does that personal style of filmmaking affect how we see things as the audience. Just a little backstory. When you are learning to be a screenwriter, one of the things they do is they tell you to write what you know, which is a great philosophy. When you teach video production and filmmaking the way I do, telling people to do films about things they know can be troubling because they see their world as being very important. It can border on being self-indulgent sometime. And so it's a fine line to walk. So what I'd like to do is sort of open up the panel with a general question. We have lots of different folks here today. So I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves as well as to sort of address a general question. Because we have people who work in sort of film historians, people who work in distribution, filmmakers, critics, lots of different people. But I'm curious as to how does sort of personal filmmaking impact you in terms of, as a critic, for example, do you feel like you have to treat people who have made themselves very vulnerable to you differently than someone who works for a corporation? Or those who have made films, do you worry that your characters might be too honest with people and people may not respond the way you want them to? So it's where we are now because the technology has allowed so many people to make films. So the barriers to your audience are sort of stripped down, and so you get to see a lot more, but you also get to see a lot more of the personal. So if you could introduce yourselves, tell the audience a little bit about yourself, and then respond to this question of, is the personal problematic?
That's a good one. Michael Phillips, I'm the film critic of the Chicago Tribune. I only respond to soulless corporate filmmaking. The first 10 years I was more susceptible to the good stuff, but no, not really. It is true. It's true that if you look at this year's lineup, there's which is a good one. There's a more distinct variety of personal voices, and that goes as far as something like Richard Linklater's film Me and Orson Welles, which he has no personal connection to the material in the biographical sense. Okay, I mean this was based on a young adult novel. Who has seen that film here? Yeah, it's based on a kind of a young adult novel, which is quite charming, and it's this fanciful depiction of what if a 17-year-old high school boy happened to fall in with Orson Welles' Mercury Theater troupe and become a part of the Julius Caesar staging on Broadway in 1937. But, like any good director, Linklater finds all kinds of feeling and detail in this period story to which he has no connection as a contemporary Texan. That makes it feel like it means something to him, and it just that's what we respond to, I think. And I'll shut up for now. But that's what we respond to, all of us as film goers. Are we in the presence of, to the exclusion of everybody else involved with making films, are we in the presence of a director whose work, is such that you feel that she or he had to make it that way, had to say it this way, had to frame everything and arrange everything just this way, if it feels like it could have meant, if this is the problem with so much of what we see, it feels like nobody made it, or anybody could have made it. And that's, you know, that's the short answer.
Good morning. I'm Doc Erickson. I was a production manager, producer, etc. years ago, and I'm not so sure that I'm able to address the problem as you've done, Michael. But I'll pass the baton to Richard.
That was a nice one. Well, I'm Richard Leskosky. I write about film for the local newspaper, the Champaign-Urbana News Gazette. I've taught film history and some criticism here at the University of Illinois for 30-some years, I guess. And let's see. In terms of approaching a film, it's sort of yes and no as to whether or not a deep personal element is important for let's say for a critic. Yes, in that the film is going to be presumably more deeply felt. That there's going to be a lot more, well, obviously personal involvement with the film director, and there's more of a, well, more of an emotional connection there. But on the other sense, no, because, well, I guess in terms of various sorts of critical approaches, not all of which I necessarily agree with, but the work does have to stand on its own. So once the filmmaker makes a film, it's out there. And when audiences see it that year that it's released, or 5 years later, or 50 years later, they're going to have different reactions to it because they're going to be bringing different things to it. The material and the way you interpret it, in a sense, is going to change over time. It might not mean to any given audience what the filmmaker thought he or she was putting into it. It might mean more, it might mean less, it might mean something different. So, excuse me, just one personal note in terms of dealing with films with a lot of personal content. That can be sometimes uncomfortable for a critic or a writer, particularly if he or she knows the filmmaker or a number of people closely connected with the film. I remember years ago when I tried writing reviews of local theater pieces that I realized that I could actually meet these people I was talking about on the street, and that somewhat affected the way I wrote about those things. Fortunately, I don't have that problem with with films. And now I'll pass it along to Sandra.
Oh, thank you. I'm Sandra Fierlinger, and our film is My Dog Tulip, the animated film here, feature film. My Dog Tulip was written by Joseph Ackerley, so it doesn't have a personal relationship. I mean, as far as, I mean, he did all the writing, and we just adapted it. But all of our other films, I believe, were known for being extremely honest, portraying deep feelings, introspection. Paul's autobiography, Drawn from Memory, was just straightforward. And Still Life with Animated Dogs and A Room Nearby, PBS specials we had, they were all stories that were personal and very truthful. But with animation, what's so lovely about what we get to do, and also with other documentaries we've put in for PBS, documentarists they don't have film footage for relaying their story, so they ask us to interpret what's on that person's mind or what might have happened, and we'll interpret it in animation. Visually, it might be totally different than what you would shoot on a camera. So those are the things that we get to do in animation. So there's a lot of, I think, honesty just in the approach of animation that gets across different feelings. But we also did a series for Oxygen, which were 2-minute films of personal stories, women's stories, when they first started their TV show. And we thought everyone had a story. And it turns out that not everybody does yet. But those were very interesting. We taped just some people that we knew, and they were just 2 minutes, and we told Oxygen that we could do an animated 2-minute film for them in 2 weeks, but they gave us a month. And they were sort of interesting because when we'd interview them, Paul would have a set of questions, and I'd be in the background because I can pick up the details or the nuances that weren't coming through. And we would interview them, and I'm not quite sure where I'm going with this. There's a lot in my mind, I'm sorry. But through animation, we really can be extremely honest, and through visual adaptation, and my mind is going blank. What was the question?
Well, actually, I think that you actually did address it. And
Okay.
But I got some more stuff for you later, though. We'll come
Okay,
back
but
to
if
it.
you see my dog Tulip tonight, it's very honestly a dog's physical reaction to life.
Good morning. My name is Bill Ross. Along with my brother Turner, we made a movie called 45365, which plays on Friday at 1. And it's about our hometown, where we grew up in Ohio. So I guess that's pretty personal. But sort of what Turner and I do is travel around the country, and we go to places that have had an impact in our life, and we stay there for about a year. And we just shoot with people that we find interesting, and that means something to us. So, I guess we just do what we like. So that's personal.
Yeah, there's not much about what we do that isn't personal. So we'll leave it at that.
Yeah, that's good.
Okay, well, my name's Kristin Thompson. I'm a film historian at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And I was talking with Eric just before the panel, and he said that when he's teaching filmmaking to his students and telling them to film what they know, he's always worried that they will become very self-indulgent. And that, I think, is the danger of the personal project, especially for a young person, because filmmaking does require a certain amount of life experience. And if you're an undergraduate in a film course, you don't have a whole lot of life experience. And very personal films in film classes tend to be about the same basic things: sex and drugs, done in fairly cliched ways. So I think people who want to make personal films probably have to learn how to do that and watch a lot of films and have some life experience. On the other hand, when I heard that this was going to be the topic of this panel, it occurred to me that some of the greatest films made in the last few decades were personal films, especially coming out of Iran, which for a while was the most interesting filmmaking country in the world, oddly enough. And I think of Abbas Kiarostami's Kolkhat trilogy, which was an extraordinary set of 3 films. He started out making a simple Iranian film, which was about a little boy trying to return a notebook to one of his schoolmates that he had picked up by mistake. And he knew the kid would get in trouble if he couldn't do his homework. And the entire film is a very touching portrayal of how determined he is to help his friend and return this notebook so he won't get in trouble. And that's the whole film. This was filmed at a little village called Kokha in Iran. And the Iranian earthquake hit shortly thereafter, devastated the region. And so Kiarostami took a trip in his car through the devastated region to see if the little boy had survived. And his next film was And Life Goes On, which was about his journey. He cast a professional actor as himself, and it's a wonderful film, whether or not you know it's a sort of autobiographical bit about this episode in Kiarostami's life. And he goes through the region. He actually used the ruins of the area and the survivors. And the film ends before he reaches Kokha, so we don't know whether the boy survived. The third film he made was Under the Olive Trees, or Through the Olive Trees. And it's about, again, he cast a professional as himself, and it's a film about the making of And Life Goes On. And the little boy shows up very briefly in the background of one scene, so we know he did survive. But it's just an extraordinary set of films, and the thing about it, one reason why it's so wonderful is it's not self-indulgent. You don't even have to know it's about Kiarostami. And I think I would show it to filmmaking students to show them how you have to set out to make a film about something that's not just yourself, even if it is your own experiences, something that people would be interested in itself. And that I think is the approach that personal filmmaking should take.
Sorry, I'm still waking up. I'm Ryan Werner. I oversee the marketing and publicity for IFC Films in New York, and I work with dozens of filmmakers a year, and we've done a lot of personal films. One of the films we have here screening tonight is Tiny Furniture, which was a film by a very young filmmaker named Lena Dunham, which is a New York-based filmmaker who basically made a movie starring her sister, and her mom, not playing themselves, basically, and she really puts herself out there. I think, like Kristin says, it's kind of like a film about many things, and it's got a lot of attention because of it, because I think it's pretty honest and true, and there's not a lot of films like it. But for a distributor, it's kind of scary. The relationship between a filmmaker and the distributor is like an important one, and I go to film festivals all year long and watch films that we're considering acquiring, and when I see a personal film, I often get scared because that there's so much person's life is invested in the film, and I've had conversations with filmmakers when I said, "Oh, I thought your film was so funny," and they're like, "Oh, it's not funny at all. I mean, it's a complete drama." So, that's never a good start, but it's a scary thing. I mean, because you're basically taking a person's life in your hands. And like several years ago, a film I worked on played here called Tarnation, which was one of the first movies made on a personal computer using home movies and recordings and photographs about a young man's life who had mental problems and his relationship with his mother, who was even worse off. And that was a really, really intense experience because what was happening in the movie was actually happening in real life as we were working on it. So, normally you can take a film to a film festival or set up a press day and then do kind of like a normal kind of promotion for a film. That one was actually literally like someone would be locked in their house and like we'd have to go try and get them out, and it was a really dramatic experience. But I think in general, there have been a lot of great personal films, and we've had a lot of opportunity to work with some great filmmakers. I mean, even films that aren't narrative films that aren't directly personal. I mean, oftentimes when you talk to the filmmaker, you realize it has come from a very personal spot. Like a movie, Fish Tank, by a director, Andrea Arnold, a British film I worked on last year, or even the Romanian movie 4 months, 3 weeks, and 2 days was there was a lot of very personal things in the movie for the filmmaker about growing up in Romania under the communist regime. So it's an interesting relationship, and I guess we can talk about it more.
Okay, thank you all. You've given us a lot to think about. I wanted to, because we've been talking about films being very personal, if you could talk about, it's still a collaborative process. I think so many people are writer, directors, producers, that sort of thing. Doc worked in an era where film was certainly a collab. People had very specific jobs and very specific roles in terms of moving the craft forward. And as we tell more personal stories, have we really taken a lot of those responsibilities and put them on one person? And how does that impact the craft if just one person is really responsible for doing so much of what actually ends up on the screen? And I mean, I specifically to you, Doc, the question of collaboration, because I'm sure that people who made films in another era all felt like they were making very personal films.
Well, yeah, I would guess so. But it seems to me it does require enormous collaboration between with the writer, director, producer, et cetera, and cast. But I was sitting here thinking about a film that we all go to see and enjoy, and it's a show and tell situation. It just evolves and you become a part of what's happening on the screen and partake in it, but you don't want to feel that it's being directed. It is just happening, and that's why it's entertaining. If the direction shows too severely, it spoils the film. You need the performances, you need the setting, et cetera, and the story. It has to tell a story. And the director, if he does his job perfectly well, you're not aware that the picture was directed.
Okay. Wait, anyone else want to weigh in on this? I'll throw another question out there. Kristin, you mentioned this idea of sort of life experience, and I wanted to talk to Bill and Turner. When did you first decide that you could make films, and how you wanted to make them? And have you ever been frightened by the personal nature of storytelling?
I think fear is a good device. I wouldn't really say that we're afraid of making anything personal, but no, there's never been a time when we weren't creating something together. There's really never been a time when we weren't making home movies or you know, whatever it is that we've been doing. And there came a time, it was about 5 years ago, when we were, you know, we're young guys, we're working in the studio system in Los Angeles, you know, working shit jobs basically, you know, for other people, and it became apparent that what we were relegating to sort of our own hobbies was actually what we needed to be doing. And for the last 4 years, we've been on the road and doing that. And the first thing that we set out to do was you know, the most personal thing that we could do is go to our hometown and make a film about. It's sort of a tone poem, basically. You know, it's a series of images and moments that sort of describe a feeling of what that place means to us. And from there, we've moved on, and it's just the two of us. You know, that's the collaboration aspect that you're talking about. And you know, we live in an era where that's possible. We don't have to have a whole crew. We don't have to have a bunch of technicians. You know, it's the two of us and 2 cameras and some editing equipment on a laptop. And you know, we spent the last year living on the Texas-Mexico border, shooting a film and getting to know ranchers, cowboys, you know, all kinds of strange, different people, and having very, very personal experiences that, you know, our films will say one thing, and those will stand as, you know, archival artifacts for an experience that we had. But I think the greatest thing that it's been, at least so far, is that we'll have really fantastic stories to tell whoever has kids, you know.
Great. Can I jump in and just say one thing? I look forward to seeing that film. I haven't seen it yet. The one I have seen, Tiny Furniture, which I liked a great deal, and I know a lot of people, some people who resisted it almost completely, and it's like like most good films, I'd say it's quite divisive that way. One of the aspects we're all dealing with as moviegoers, I think, is that because it is economically feasible for filmmakers to go out and do all this on their own with fewer collaborators and just sort of work traveling light, it makes it seem easy. And a film that I responded to, like Tiny Furniture or My Dog Tulip, which is fantastic, makes it seem easy, and this is the danger. Tiny Furniture will encourage many a less talented filmmaker to say, yes, I'm going to make a film with my brother and my dad in my apartment, and I'm somehow going to pull from the morass of my impressions about my difficult life in my early 20s, a film that will be, you know, shattering and beautiful or whatever. It makes it seem easy, and that's the wonderful thing that films of every aesthetic, you know, whether it's old Hollywood, classical craftsmanship, or shooting on the fly with the lightest digital camera imaginable, it all, the good ones, the most personal ones, make it seem like, yes, I could, even if it doesn't make you think I could do that, it just makes you think that it all feels like one exhalation of a thought.
Is divisiveness a good thing in the film-going experience? Is it good to make films that will bring some people in, but also leave other people sort of leaving the theater? Because it's particularly when we're dealing with very personal films. Going to a festival like Sundance, for example, you'll see a film and you'll think when it's over how much you would like those 2 hours of your life back. But someone will invariably stand up in the audience and say, that is the most brilliant piece of film I've ever seen. And so is divisiveness, we think in terms of films trying to bring in everyone, but maybe it's a good thing if you don't bring in everyone. I don't know.
I think there's a couple kinds. I mean, at least like in distribution, there's a couple kinds of divisiveness. I'm just working on a movie called Certified Copy right now by Abbas Kiarostami, which has been really successful. It's been a little divisive, I mean, but it was a good kind of divisive. When we bought the movie, my colleague and I talked about how we thought people would talk about the movie for hours after they saw it, which I think has happened, at least at our theater in New York. I've noticed people are arguing about it after, like, what happened? But I think, like, with a movie like Tiny Furniture, you know, it's a movie that you really need to have the reviews behind and have good word of mouth. And I think that I've worked with a lot of these young filmmakers, and I think a lot of them do get attacked for being, you know, what's the word? I'm sorry. I haven't had enough coffee yet. You know, I think they get attacked a lot for putting their life out there too much, and I think that, you know, there were a lot of reviews that were not very kind to her because I thought she was giving too much, but I think, you know, that doesn't help. I mean, I think, you know, for a film to be successful these days, because there's so many films opening every single week, you kind of need to have like some strong critical support for the film.
Okay. I'm going to have one more question for the panel, and then I want to open it up to people on the floor. Just in general, in your film-going experiences, can you tell me a film that you've seen that moved you deeply, that you felt for some reason the world just didn't get it the way you got it? So I give you a chance to think about that, because I know it's kind of a hard question, but I do think we have moments where we personally embrace a film and we wonder why the world doesn't love it as much as we do, and I wanted to know if you've had that experience. And then there's a mic there, so if you want to line up, we'll take some questions for you. Anybody want to volunteer?
Well, I have one, but I mean, I don't I never assumed anyone else would like it. I mean that, I guess if you see a movie, if you see a movie you respond to personally, and some of the, this is kind of two questions, because if you're trying to deal with it, if you're trying to write about it, that's one thing. If you're just responding as a human being to it, that's the first thing that comes before the write. And there's a Turkish filmmaker, Nuri Bilge Ceylan, who made a film called Climates, which is a piece about the end of an affair and what happens after the end. And the filmmaker stars in it and co-stars with his wife, and it's quite raw in a lot of the intensity of it. It's also extraordinarily beautiful. It was the first film I ever saw shot on digital that made me think you could get poetry out of this. This is a few years ago. Now everyone's shooting on digital. But, and you can get a very good-looking movie for not much money now. And then that's a non-sophisticated way of putting it, but there it is. But it brought to life for me a certain kind of steely, passive-aggressive male that most people would never have the nuts to put at the center of any picture, because it's a completely forbidding character who doesn't reveal much, and he doesn't really learn anything, and he, there's nothing that. But so is that gonna even find any kind of success on, say, the American, especially an art house circuit? No, and I never assumed it would, but I adore it.
Well, the one that comes to mind to me is one of this year's crops that I loved. I didn't like the situation at all, but it was a magnificent movie and didn't get a lot of attention, and a lot of people said, oh, they hated it, they wouldn't go see it, etc. And that was Winter's Bones.
Well, you put me on the spot, Eric. In my case, it's usually I don't understand why people like the films I don't like. So I guess I'll pass on to Sandra on that.
We don't go to the movies, so
I'd say a lot of the films that I watched during high school, like I would be sitting in the basement watching 8 1/2, and if anybody that I played football with knew that I was doing that, I probably, that just wouldn't have worked out.
That's fair. That's fair. We also watch a lot of blockbuster films that I think deserve their, like 2012 or...
Best comedy that came out that year.
Yeah, definitely an outstanding comedy. We'll move on.
I must say I feel on the spot too, because I can't think of titles, although I can think of titles of films that I really loved at the time, and they were unsuccessful films which have subsequently become classics, something like Jacques Tati's Playtime, which came out in '68 and bankrupted him, and now is thought of as a great film. I think of Zodiac, which is undoubtedly David Fincher's best film, and yet not one of his more successful ones, and one which has become almost a cult classic at this point. So I am afraid that those are the kinds of films that I tend to think of when I think of underappreciated films, but they do tend to be appreciated eventually by at least some people.
I was going to say the same thing. So I was going to say Zodiac, or a movie like Dazed and Confused, which wasn't so popular when it first came out, but now, I think everybody watches when you're in high school. And basically every movie I work on, I feel that way about, so.
Yeah, and if I could say, Certified Copy is a great film, and it's also made by Abbas Kiarostami, so just shows he's one of our great filmmakers working today.
Okay, I wanted to open it up to questions. There's a mic in the center of the floor there. You can line yourself up, and if you have questions for our panel. I don't know. Ask the technical people. Do you need them to use the mic? Is that necessary? It's preferred. Okay.
Zodiac's I'll just fill this for 8 seconds. Zodiac is a fascinating case because it is David Fincher, whether you are responding to what his entire approach to making movies, that's a film, again, where does he have a personal connection to the material in some ways, because whoever was living in any half of the western half of the U.S. at the time was affected by these news reports of the serial killer that ultimately would never get caught. But that film is not personal in any kind of messy or indulgent sense. It's fastidiously impersonal, but in a fascinating, really, really compelling way.
Though it is based on an autobiography, so in that sense, it's one removed anyway.
Sandra, we do all have a story, even if you don't think so.
You have to be old enough.
Just ask the people I'm here with. They hear these stories. And Turner, Bill, did you see Catfish?
Yes.
Yes, and I'm from Michigan. So personally, I was real involved in that movie, so that was a personal connection. But last night when we saw the second movie, Natural Selection, the director said that he had well-known actresses who could have played the lead role. And I think if a well-known actress had played that role, I'd have been thinking of that actress, not the woman who did it. I did not know her name, and she totally drew me in because I wasn't thinking of Julia Roberts or whoever. So I think the selection of the people who are not popular can bring out a character that I can personally appreciate rather than think about a movie star. And that's my opinion. Thank you.
Thank you. No questions at all? This big, large group. Step on up. There's always has to be some brave people out there.
Oftentimes when we make films, we impose structure on stories, whether that's the classical Hollywood structure or just a structure in general. And when we make films about personal stories, we have certain obligation to be faithful to the story being told. So, especially for those of you who actually have made films about personal stories, how do you negotiate the tension between telling the story, which doesn't really have a beginning, middle, and end, and it's still a personal story, and yet still bringing your filmmaker's vision and your idea about how this story should be told? So how do you negotiate this tension between the story, the person whose story is, and the way how you want to tell it? Thank you.
I would say that's actually a very good question, especially relating to what we do. We because we do documentary, because we get so invested in people's lives. I think it's a very fine line to draw, because inevitably we are creating artifice. We are creating some sort of construct. We are utilizing the artifacts of our experience to create something that people can consume in a way, And I think you even stated it in your question. The way that we handle it is by saying that there is no beginning and there is no end. There is only the time period that we have invested in. We can't speak for their greater experience. We don't create arcs that define people or a place, really. And there is a sense of ambiguity. The people on the internet call it boring. The idea that we are capturing moments with people, and that those moments should speak for themselves, that should be the perfect form of conveyance. That if we can capture a sincere and very telling moment or series of moments or situations with people, that through the conveyance of those, that maybe that is a more defining thing than creating some sort of, backstory or conclusion, or, stating that this is this is someone's experience. We simply, put it out there for your interpretation. So.
We have a wonderful opportunity because people will tell us their story, and we can draw it and paint it. And the story in words are on their own personal level, and our interpretation might be something totally different that comes out as an image. Like in A Room Nearby, there were 6 stories of loneliness, and that's a little bit of a subject that's hard to talk about. Most people say, well, I'm not lonely, but my sister is. But through that, we can show people's denial about what they're verbally saying means something else, so we can show that visually and have some fun with it.
I had a question about technique. I'm thinking of Kurosawa's films and how important the lighting is in his films. When you go to the to the computerized whole approach, is that whole bit of artistry and among the filmmakers merged into just the director? Or what happens to these different, there used to be the person who did the photography and the person who did the lighting and the person who did this. Does the digitalization bring that all into one? And what happens to that art of the lighting? I'm thinking particularly, but there are probably other aspects also with this, the newer technologies.
And I'll just add, because I think there's a really good question about is personal filmmaking a style? When we think of style in filmmaking, we often think of the ways in which the visual image is constructed, but is personal filmmaking a style? Like, do you guys have a style?
Us?
Yeah. Yeah.
I guess.
I just throw it open for everyone, but I was just asking you specifically, though, can we say that that is a style?
We
because
should
it's
probably
not
ask the critics down there. I mean, it's definitely one way of going about things, and the woman's question is a good one. But those arts are not lost, and certainly, digital media has made it easier and more accessible and possible for people like us to make films where you are all of those things. But even with those new medias, you're not losing, those beautiful arts of, the technicians. But yeah, this is certainly one style. This is certainly one way of doing things, and I'm glad that it exists. It also means that anybody can put stuff out there, which means that there is a glut of substance out in the world. I don't know how the hell people weed through it, but we've been given an opportunity to a platform where people have accepted what we've done, and I hope that we do. I hope that we do have some sort of style, but I wouldn't know what the hell that is.
I think in the case of Tiny Furniture, which hopefully you'll see tonight, there was a small crew, and there was a cinematographer that worked with the director. His name is Jody Lee Lipes, and I think he's probably one of the really talented up-and-coming cinematographers. And I think though the cinematography isn't showy in Tiny Furniture, it's really well composed, and but you can also watch another film that he directed and shot called Opus Jazz, which is a collaboration with the New York City Ballet, which is absolutely stunning. But I think they had a lot of conversations about how the film should look, and he shot it, and they're working together on a new TV show she's doing for HBO also.
His film Brock Enright should not have been overlooked the way that it was. It's really awesome.
Yeah, to talk about the digital technology and lighting specifically, on the one hand, digital cameras allow people to shoot with available light in very low lighting conditions. So in a sense, the control of the lighting isn't quite as necessary as it were. You can opt to shoot in very low lighting conditions without adding artificial light. But on the other hand, digital technology has permitted lighting to be manipulated in the post-production process. So there's, now we have what's called selective digital color grading, in which you can essentially paint light into an image and manipulate the color and so forth. And there are lighting programs. So people are paying attention to lighting, and if they don't like the way something was lit on the set, they can manipulate it later. So I think style and lighting are still very much on people's minds in terms of the overall filming process.
Turner had the critics is personal filmmaking sort of a style that you can identify and sort of associate with a specific individual, but also if that is a style with a specific individual, how much personal stuff does one person have to share?
Well, it depends, I suppose, on the person's life and so on. But I'm not sure that there is really anything that can be identified as a personal style, because I would argue that one of the most personal forms of filmmaking, both now and historically, is animation. Winsor McCay back in 1910, 1911, 1912 was making animated films based on comic strips that he had drawn, and he actually appeared with these films on the vaudeville stages, and then when that run was done, he actually had himself filmed, and he became part of the film along with his animation. And an animator can show you whatever is in his or her mind, whatever he's experienced or she's experienced, whether or not there was a camera around to record it when it happened. And with animation, you can also get into, an animator can actually show you, visualizations of his or her thoughts, moods, feelings, delusions, and whatever. And a couple of years ago, we saw an example of this at this festival with Sita Sings the Blues. And that was done by a single individual, Nina Paley, who wrote it, directed it, animated it. It was about her life. It wove her life in with Indian mythology. And it was a great film. It was also very different in style from My Dog Tulip and let's see, it's Still Life with Animated Dogs, which is very much in the same visual style as Tulip, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Yeah. So you have radically different styles represented in animation, and that's a radically different sort of production system from making documentaries or fictional films. So yeah, I don't think you can really say there's a particular personal style.
Okay. Right. Did I have another question? I saw someone was like standing up and then they sat down again. Oh, there you are. Oh, come on, ground. You can just line up there. No worries.
My question is about YouTube. It seems, if you're talking about personal filmmaking, I'm not sure you can call YouTube filmmaking, but those are snippets of very, very personal, almost too personal, sometimes, bits of film. And I'm just wondering how does that have an effect on what you do? Different kind, obviously different outcome, but how has this going viral of all these different YouTube things affect what you folks are trying to do?
The first thing that comes to my mind is it's the age of instant gratification. YouTube is so instant, and the story is just there. There's no processing compared to filmmaking, and that's the difference. There's no thinking behind it.
That's the peculiar thing about our time. you know, we're in a heavy cycle of solipsism and narcissism, and we're all are these self-fabulizing narcissists with our Facebook pages and, you know, tweets that say I'm eating a bagel without even a joke. And it's an odd time to even be wrestling with the question of what's personal filmmaking versus kind of what's autobiographical filmmaking, which is a different, you know, that's the distinction that should be made, I think. I mean, the style question is a whole another panel, really, but even directors from the past who would just sneer at this notion of of direct personal expression, at least to an interviewer, is John Ford, Howard Hawks. You know, this is why the auteurs adore these guys, because there is a personal stamp, and there are motifs and visual qualities, and and these are personal artistic predilections by these directors that create a statement over a lifetime. The only other thing I'd say is that what I heard one writer, Stephen Dietz, say once is that it's not write what you know, it's write what you need to know. And that strikes me that with the Ross fellows who are new to me, I'm sensing that you're not going into a year-long relocation with we know what we need to know. We want, it's more the latter. Like let's find out.
What is the difference? You said the difference between autobiographical filmmaking and personal filmmaking. How do you what's your distinction there?
Well, I think all kinds of filmmaking can be deeply personal. Whatever language you're working in, visual language. But when you start laying out autobiographical elements, it's easier to be, I think, accepted or rejected on those grounds. Okay. And I think some filmmakers never get beyond just sort of the first journal entry nature of an autobiographical expression. As I say, Tiny Furniture is a dangerous movie to show a room full of aspiring aspiring hyphenates, because it makes it look easy, and she's got a droll comic touch that you cannot teach anybody. You know, so I think it's a tricky one. I like it a lot.
It's interesting though when you talk to filmmakers, you know, like Lena Dunham. It's obviously a personal film, but when I've been working with the director Olivier Assayas, who did a movie Carlos last year, and the movie Summer Hours before, and a movie Demon Lover that I worked with them before. So I've worked with them 3 times, and the films could not be more different. One is like about the cold world of technology and business. The other one's about Carlos the Jackal, and then there's one about a family doing away with their family home and belongings when the mother dies. And every single film that he's made that I've worked with him, he talks about in deeply personal ways. And I think, you know, if you saw them, especially Demon Lover, you might not think of it as being a personal film, but I mean, I think when you talk to him, he considers it very personal and talks about where this came from in his personality and his life.
You were standing. Come on up.
Well, I think you might have addressed it already. There are so many autobiographical books out, and they're not even autobiographical in that they start at the beginning of a person's life and end. They're just kind of the person putting everything out there. Does that mean that there's a bigger audience for that kind of thing these days? And do you find it easier to make personal films these days? Just because the audience is primed for it? Everybody is putting everything out there?
I think sometimes they're the hardest films, at least to market. I mean, I think convincing someone to come see a movie like Tiny Furniture about a girl telling the story of her life in New York City she's pretty well off, I think can be challenging. I think that people do have the instinct that a lot of films by young people are narcissistic, and I think you have to work extra hard to kind of develop an audience. But I think in the case of Tiny Furniture, Lena Dunham is incredibly likable and a real person, and is not like someone like that when you meet her, you don't get the sense like she's, you know, just trying to get famous. I mean, she's like the real deal, and I think you'll see in her upcoming work that she has a lot to say. But I think it is tougher to kind of market personal, small stories.
The gentleman back there.
Just a personal note, I'm really a novice, and I feel very humbled to be addressing a question to this panel. But I would like to make or prepare a question which somewhat is important to me, and that is, how do we as evaluators, and I probably am addressing you, Michael, a little bit, evaluators of film, how do we maintain an objectivity where we separate our personal take from what we're seeing in the film? I find that some of the finest reviewers bring quite a bit of their own personal life to the whatever it may be, whether it's the orchestra or to what music or whatever they're evaluating. But I know there must be some need to keep my personal life separate from my personal story, separate from the personal issues that we're seeing in the film. I want to make one reference. It's like John Love, that's me. I came to that film last night, Natural Selection, as a very much opposed to R-rated films. I'm just not that personality. On the other hand, I walked away very impressed.
I think what you're getting at is right at the center of this question of what's personal and what's autobiographical. I think there's no such thing as objectivity in criticism. None. There's no such thing as objectivity. There's only informed subjectivity. And it's the first part of that, the informed part, that where you have to prove it, that you have something to say about this film. Now, I think if film criticism, just like if filmmaking, devolves into or settles for just a lot of autobiographical, half-formed, vaguely interesting nonsense, then you tend not to come back to that voice. You tend not to seek out the next time you see the filmmakers or the critic's name on something. That's autobiographical, but if you do it right, sparingly, nobody does it better than Roger Ebert. In terms of like a lot about his life, but rarely, if ever, at the expense of what he's actually writing about. But that's a big difference between personal and autobiographical. Everything should be personal, and nothing should be objective. Is there such a thing as objectivity in filmmaking? Hell no. I mean, even films like the Frederick Wise. I've thought of this. It's definitely Texas week here. I'm always thinking about Texas stuff this week. Frederick Wiseman's documentary Boxing Gym, which is just kind of a day in the life of a boxing gym outside Austin, Texas, and it's very much like what somebody said about you don't get the beginning and the end. It's just more like you're plopped in the middle, and there's no voiceover narration, there's no labeling of people on screen, there's nothing except the experience of just hanging out with these people, and it's fantastic. It's not, it doesn't have a huge overriding personal obvious agenda, but it is very personal.
Several of you have referred to the broad universe of so many films out there, so many personal films being made. I'm curious how it happens that films are chosen for distribution. How do you separate the film you made, Ross Brothers, and Tiny Furniture, and My Dog Tulip? How do those get noticed and rise to the top for distribution?
A lot of it starts with film festivals, and all companies have different kind of objectives, but one of the most important things is like reading the response of the critics at the festivals. At the Cannes Film Festival, which starts next week, which is probably our biggest festival of the year in terms of buying films, we look at what's being written about the films while we're there. We read Michael Phillips's writings in the Chicago Tribune and Roger Ebert's blog, just to kind of talk to people, But that's kind of how we base it and think of, is there an audience for the film? In the case of Tiny Furniture, you know, it was really a film that we didn't expect what happened with it to happen. We saw it at the South by Southwest Film Festival, and we all really liked it. But, you know, we didn't expect the kind of attention it got. It was kind of like a lucky thing. But sometimes a film just really connects with writers and critics, and they can really help champion a film and give it a much bigger life.
That's definitely been, you know, why we're sitting here. You know, I can't imagine, and we still, you know, we talk about it with each other. Why the hell anybody pays attention to what we're doing? But the thing is, some people have, and these people have really big voices. And when someone like Roger Ebert writes a review for for a film like ours, it puts it in a different stratosphere where people look at it as something that they should be paying attention to. It gives it a life of its own. So your question's an interesting one, because what we do has nothing to do with this other life of it. And it is very much, you know, many voices talking about one thing that put it in a place that make it valid, you know, that make it valid for other people to consume and make it this, you know, product that is available to people. So.
With My Dog Tulip, well, any animation, it's festivals, animation festivals just aren't what they used to be with the independent filmmakers. And it's extremely political, and it takes a lot of money now. And you're competing with the Disney and the Pixars, and it's all rigged. So, I mean, it really is. And we've learned to avoid that. And with My Dog Tulip, the reviews were incredible. And from the New York Times onward, and Roger did a beautiful review of our work. For us, the producer wanted to take it to Cannes, and we disagreed with him, and we were invited to Toronto, and that's where a lot of people pick up distribution. But My Dog Tulip's a real tricky one. I mean, the dog lovers, I mean, it is an R-rated animated film about dogs. So it's a little hard to place. It's not quite up there with Rin Tin Tin. But it has a life of its own in art houses, and New Yorker Films picked it up as a distributor, and they take on smaller films. So there just isn't competition. I mean, we made it. We couldn't make it to the top 3 for, Oscars? Which is fine for Paul and I. We really don't care about that stuff. But distribution is difficult in the animation world.
Just as a quick follow-up, don't you have to get invited to these film festivals? And how does somebody notice one of your films in order to invite you to the film festival so Roger Ebert will write about you?
Yeah, you get invited, or the producer makes them pay for you, you know. They're all a little different as far as the animation goes.
But it should be said that the vast majority of independent films don't get distributed into theaters. The Sundance Film Festival has something like, 3,000 submissions a year, and they take 100, and that's the first winnowing process. So Sundance is a festival where people apply. They send their films. They work differently. Cannes is strictly invitation.
They have a selection committee of really patient people behind the scenes that watch a lot of films and decide which are going to be in the festival. So that's the beginning, I think.
And you do have to, it's a matter of luck sometimes, just who's in charge of these festivals, what their taste is like. If you don't, what you want to feel is if you're attending a festival regularly, you want to feel that the people, the programmers are, again, responding personally to the work. they're not. There's a million factors about what goes into the final lineup, and some of it's rather craven and cynical, or more strategic, let's say. But you know, Michael Kutza, who's run the Chicago Festival forever, you know, has been dining out on the anecdote for decades that, you know, he took a flyer on Martin Scorsese's second or third film before he was anybody, and it worked out.
Yeah. Do we have any other questions? Because I don't want to close it down, but I would like to thank you all for taking your time this morning to be with us. And one thing that we're going to all get to experience here at the festival is this opportunity to engage films that will touch us personally, but also to hear from the creative people who are putting so much of themselves out there for our enjoyment. So I hope that you enjoy that, and I want to thank our panel for taking the time today. There was about a 15-minute break for the turnover for the next panel, so the next panel will start at 10:30.